Queen Elizabeth. No, not this one. This one. Queen Elizabeth I just might be one of the most badass and successful queens of her time. From political stability and cultural prosperity to crushing her enemies who had more military power and keeping ministers who stood in her way on a leash, we're set for lots of action this time around. Get ready, because we're gonna be going through her story and what we can learn from her way of doing things. On the morning of Saturday, January 14, 1559, English people of all ages and classes gathered in the streets of London. This was the day before the coronation of the 25-year-old Queen Elizabeth Tudor. You see, it was tradition to lead a ceremony before coronation day. Thing is, most people had never actually seen Elizabeth, and they were anxious and uneasy to say the least. You see, at this time, England's financial state was in shambles. The government was heavily in debt, beggars were everywhere, and thieves roamed the countryside. But worst of all, the country had just been through a virtual civil war between Protestants and Catholics. Elizabeth's father, Henry VIII, ruled from 1491 to 1547 and created the Church of England. He wanted to transform England into a Protestant country. His daughter, however, Queen Mary I, tried to return England to the Catholic faith in 1553. She persecuted Protestants and ended up burning 300 people alive, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary. Yeah, things weren't too good. But after Queen Mary died in late 1558, Elizabeth was next in line for the throne. Many were skeptical that a young 25-year-old woman was gonna rule them. Others were hopeful, but regardless of what people thought, the fact was, as I told you folks, they hardly knew anything about her. They did, however, know about her dark past, and how when she wasn't even 3, her father, Henry VIII, had her mother, Anne Boleyn, who was his second wife, executed on false charges. Also, Queen Mary hated Elizabeth and threw her into the Tower of London back in 1554. She wanted to just get rid of her and execute her for allegedly conspiring against the throne. Sure enough though, she couldn't find any evidence to convict her because frankly, Elizabeth was innocent. The hell that Elizabeth had to go through in her earlier years made people skeptical if she would be fit to rule. Was she gonna be another Henry or another Bloody Mary? Anyways, back to the present. The ceremony was traditionally supposed to be more like a party, a day of fun celebration, you know? Elizabeth had done enough party planning and she did not disappoint. Colorful decorations, banners on every window, musicians and jesters roaming the streets and entertaining everyone. Preparation 100. As a light snow fell, the queen-to-be Elizabeth appeared. She had a powerful yet charming presence. Wherever she went, the crowd would quiet down in respect and awe. She wore the most luxurious golden robe with the most magnificent jewels. Everything was great, the party was going really well, it was all good. As the day went by, the English people saw something they had never seen before or even imagined. The queen seemed to enjoy talking with crowds of normal people. She listened to the poorest of Londoners wishing her the best as she got emotional. When she would talk, it almost felt casual and relatable. Her love for the people was obvious. An older, kind of poor woman gave her a sprig of rosemary for good luck, and she held onto it for the rest of the day. One witness wrote, "If ever any person had either the gift or the style to win the hearts of people, it was this queen." This is phenomenal and very out of character for someone of the royal family. Back then, whenever kings and queens would appear in public, they would keep their distance and surround themselves with guards. Don't want to accidentally touch any filthy peasants or commoners. Yeah, they expected everyone to obey them and worship them just for their status. Elizabeth broke the status quo and English people loved it, and I mean loved it. They wouldn't stop talking about the new queen and her electrifying presence. The queen was set for a very successful coronation. Before the coronation, the queen had promised a certain Sir William Cecil that he would become her top minister. This guy was a trusted minister who served under her half-brother Edward VI. He ruled from age 9 until he passed away at the age of 15. Yeah, what do you think this is? People didn't have healthcare. Kinda like USA. Anyways, Elizabeth and William teamed up. They were childhood buddies and knew each other well for the most part. Back in the good old days, they would play chess and Elizabeth would destroy him with patient and elaborate traps. William was also familiar with Elizabeth's dark past and how she not only lost her mother but also her good stepmother, Catherine Howard, when she was only 8. Who was also executed on, once again, potentially false charges of adultery. Man, this guy just doesn't stop, does he? William also knew about the few months Elizabeth's spent in the Tower of London. The experience was very traumatic. Imagine being 21 years old, locked up in this random place and waiting to be executed at any moment. So anyways, William knew Elizabeth well, but there was one thing that bothered him about her. To William, ruling was not for women. Queen Mary I, Bloody Mary, was England's first female ruler, and her reign was a disaster, to be fair. All the government ministers were men, and all the foreign diplomats were also men. Elizabeth would just not be able to stand up to these guys, is what William thought anyway. He figured that slowly, as Elizabeth failed as queen, he and his affiliates would take over and end up controlling things, turning Elizabeth into no more than a puppet. And to do that, he'd have to get her married as soon as possible, so her husband, the king, would run things and William could have his way. But from the beginning of Elizabeth's reign, William realized that the queen wasn't easy pickings. She was bold and had plans of her own. Her first day on the job, she rounded up her counselors in a meeting and schooled them on the country's financial situation. That's right, she did her homework and she knew more about the country's finances than any one of these guys. Her ultimate goal was to make the country prosper and have more assets than liabilities. William was appointed Secretary of State, and immediately Elizabeth held several meetings with him every single day and did not give him any time to spare. She'd keep him on a tight leash, unlike her father who'd let ministers run things while he horsed around. William was made to work hard, but Elizabeth worked even harder than anyone else. She put in more hours than anyone else and kept working well past midnight. She practiced what she preached, and frankly, this display of insane work ethic intimidated William and his colleagues. If he followed her orders and did a good job, she would smile, everything was nice and buddy, you know, it's all good. But if he messed up or aggressively disagreed with the queen on something, she would shut him out for days, full-blown silent treatment. And William would return home to drown in his own anxiety. Did he lose her trust? Did she hate him now? Sometimes her thunderous style reminded him of her father. Oh no, she was not easy to manage. And slowly, William found himself working harder than ever just to impress her. She set the bar quite high. As part of William's plan to have the men slowly take over, he rigged things so all the representatives from other countries would be routed to his desk, so he can pull all the foreign affairs strings as he liked. He kept the queen in the dark on some very important matters. Soon enough though, the jig was up. The queen discovered that he was doing things behind her back, and behind his back, she rerouted all of the diplomatic and foreign affairs back to her desk. William felt like he was getting checkmated. It was chess all over again, and Elizabeth was playing several moves ahead. He got angry and tried to confront her, but she immediately stood her ground and shut him down with straight up facts and logic. You see, unlike William, she spoke and read all of the major European languages, so it only made sense for her to deal with foreign diplomats for the greater good. William saw that Elizabeth was a master negotiator. Arguing at this point was pointless. This William guy just keeps getting checkmated. He slowly dropped the case and figured that, oh well, Elizabeth will be in charge for now until I get her married and her husband takes over, or so he thought. I feel like I'm gonna have to say that sentence a few more times in this video. You should probably know now that Queen Elizabeth did not want to get married whatsoever, and I mean she did not want anything to do with marriage. One of her most famous quotes actually is, "I would rather be a beggar and single than a queen and married." To Elizabeth, getting married did not just mean starting a family and settling down. It meant giving up her power as the absolute ruler of England, and by giving up her power, Elizabeth would also be giving up her freedom. William heard some rumors about how Elizabeth told a few friends that she didn't want to ever get married, but he didn't buy it. He didn't think it could be true. To keep England without a clear heir of the bloodline was to risk a future civil war. Surely she could see the logic in this, right? His goal was simple. He needed to get the queen to agree to marry a prince from another country to forge an alliance that would benefit England in its poor situation. There were three options on the horizon: the 14-year-old French king, Charles IX, Archduke Charles of Austria, and William's biggest fear, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. This guy was someone lower in rank than Elizabeth. With him around, all kinds of chaos would ensue in England. The different countries pressed their cases. Elizabeth would play a little cat and mouse house game with them. She'd pretend to be interested in one of them, then slowly lose interest and buddy up to someone else. Rinse and repeat. She used it as a political trick to manipulate the other nations. If the Spanish were suddenly creating trouble on the continent, she would start negotiating marriage with the French to make the Spanish king afraid of a French-English alliance and back off. She kept playing this game year after year, having all the neighboring nations dancing in the palm of her hand. She then confessed to William that she was not planning on getting married. Clearly that did not sit well with him, because he had Parliament threaten to cut off funds if she did not promise to get married soon. That's right, folks, Queen Elizabeth was getting demonetized. Subscribe so I can get monetized though. But here's how she dealt with that. She would say something like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I see," and negotiate softly. Then once she secured the money, she'd come up with some other excuse to break off the marriage talk. Basic excuses, guys, like, "Oh, he's too young," or "he's too Catholic," or "he's not manly enough," or "he's just not my type." She was not going down. After a few more years of this, William realized that, yeah, Elizabeth was not gonna get married. There was nothing he could do to make it happen. He had to admit something to himself though. Elizabeth was one heck of a leader. She cut off expenses and managed to pull the government out of debt, something the US is still having a hard time doing till this day. Meanwhile, Spain and France kept destroying themselves with endless wars, and Elizabeth carefully kept England out of all of that stuff. Under her leadership, the country was prospering. She treated both Catholics and Protestants well, and the bitter feelings of the tension from the religious war only 10 years ago were almost gone now. William would later write, "There was never so wise a woman born as Queen Elizabeth." He dropped the whole marriage thing, and the country became used to the idea of the Virgin Queen, married to her subjects. Oh, how beautiful. Over the years though, a problem began to rise, and Queen Elizabeth's competence was in question. The fate of Mary, Queen of Scots, who was Elizabeth's cousin. Mary had gotten herself into lots of trouble back in Scotland. The people hated her for all the affairs she was having and her possible involvement in the murder of her husband, Lord Daneley. In 1567, she was forced to give up the Scottish throne and was thrown into prison. She would escape later and run away to England, leaving herself at the mercy of her cousin, Queen Elizabeth. Elizabeth had every reason to hate Mary and just kick her back to Scotland. Unlike Elizabeth, Mary was selfish and immoral. She was Catholic, which made some Catholics want to put her on the throne and get rid of the Protestant Elizabeth. The idea is, Mary was a threat. She couldn't be trusted. Elizabeth let Mary stay under a little bit of house arrest. This did not sit well with William. England was sheltering a Scottish criminal of the royal family, which would threaten relations between England and Scots big time. Mary did not deserve Elizabeth's kindness because it didn't take her long to begin secretly conspiring against Elizabeth. When this was discovered, everyone was like, "Alright, that's it, off with her head." But Elizabeth said no. The actual reason remains unclear, but this made Elizabeth look weak and selfish in the public eye. Yet again, in 1586, Mary was involved in the most devious plot to assassinate Queen Elizabeth, so that Mary could take the throne for herself. This was no ordinary plan because Mary had secret backing from both the Pope and the Spanish. More than anything though, there was now concrete proof that she was involved in treason. The general public at this time was going crazy. This plot could mean civil war. Now Mary had to be executed. But still, Elizabeth hesitated. Mary went on trial and she was proven to be guilty. And yet Elizabeth could not bring herself to sign the death warrant. William and his colleagues had never seen the Queen look so weak before. It took some time, but finally, after lots of pressuring, Elizabeth signed the death warrant in February of the next year. Mary was beheaded the day after, and the country began to celebrate. Heck yeah, we got rid of Bloody Mary 2.0, potentially. The English people quickly forgave Elizabeth for her hesitation. In fact, her hesitation made her seem kind of more heroic because the people realized that she was putting the welfare of the country over her personal considerations. Peace was once again restored to England. Until he showed up, King Philip II of Spain had known Elizabeth for many years, and he was Bloody Mary's husband. You see, back when she imprisoned Elizabeth in the Tower of London, Philip was actually the one who managed to de-escalate the situation and convince Bloody Mary to release Elizabeth. At first, him and Elizabeth got along pretty well, but as time passed, he began to straight up hate her because she was the only obstacle in his goal of bringing back Catholicism as the main faith. He would have to humble her. he would have to defeat her. He certainly didn't see Elizabeth as the rightful ruler of England. He built up his forces, specifically the navy, and quietly prepared for the enterprise of England. A massive invasion that would overwhelm the English island and raise Catholicism back to the top. To him, the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, was the final straw. That's it. He was going to invade England. King Philip was very confident in his ability to succeed. He believed that Elizabeth was at an overwhelming disadvantage because she was a woman. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? A woman couldn't possibly be able to lead a war. Of course, that's what he thought. Elizabeth never paid much attention to her military, and the English navy was small compared to the great powerful Spanish galleons. For those who don't know, a galleon is literally just a huge Spanish warship. Back then, when it came to raw manpower, England's army was kind of pathetic compared to Spain's. Philip also had a bunch of gold. Yeah, he was filthy rich and had all the money he needed to finance the invasion. Philip wanted to invade in the summer of 1587, but before he could, Sir Francis Drake raided the Spanish coast and destroyed many of its ships. He also stole a bunch of gold while he was at it. The invasion was postponed till the next year. But now, Philip prepared his forces. He would launch an armada, a Spanish fleet of 130 warships, manned by more than 30,000 men. They were set up for success. With that kind of raw power, they could easily destroy the English navy, rendezvous with a large Spanish force stationed in the Netherlands, cross the Channel, infiltrate London, and capture the Queen, so they could put her on trial for executing Queen of Scots. After getting rid of Elizabeth, he'd put his own daughter on the throne of England. On May 1588, the fleet of battleships was launched. By July, they had made it to the English coast. The Spanish galleons had perfected a certain type of powerful warfare, where they would leverage their raw size to move close to enemy ships, grapple onto them, and raid them. Kind of like pirates, if I do say so myself. These ships had a weakness though. They had never done battle with the much smaller and faster English ships. The English ships were smaller, faster, had long cannons, and knew how to handle the rough English seas. The Spanish didn't fare too well, because the English seas were way harsher and rougher than the Mediterranean they were used to. On July 27, the Spanish fleet anchored at Calais, but in the middle of the night, the English sent 5 ships that were set on fire toward the enemy fleet. The fire quickly spread from ship to ship. The Spanish ships tried to regroup, but they were very clumsy and scattered, and the English ships just kept firing at them, and the Spanish were forced to retreat into the stormiest parts of the North Sea. Imagine fighting on water, but losing cause you got burned. The idea they had is that they would cycle around and try and retreat to Spain, but in the process they lost most of their ships and over 20,000 soldiers. The Spanish got absolutely ratioed because the English lost 0 ships and had only about 100 casualties. Till this day, this remains one of the most lopsided and uneven military victories in history. For Philip though, it was the most humiliating moment of his life. Queen Elizabeth was yet again thinking many steps ahead. She had invested lots of money to create the most elaborate spy system in Europe, which was what allowed her to know the exact date Philip was gonna attack. Before Philip attacked, Elizabeth built up the English navy and had smaller, faster, and cheaper ships that were more suited for the English seas built in bulk. Unlike Philip, who liked to boss his people around, Queen Elizabeth left battle strategy in the hands of her military admirals, but with one condition, that they fight as close as possible to England. The giant Spanish ships could not handle the rough English seas, and the morale of English soldiers fighting with their country literally behind them was off the charts. After this crushing defeat, Spain went bankrupt and never returned to its old glory. Queen Elizabeth ended this man's whole career, literally. Philip retired to his palace. He hid away and holed himself up for months, contemplating the disaster that had just unfolded. Yes, folks, the Spanish king was experiencing what we all know as depression. In the years to come, England would prosper and rise to power, while Spain would become a second-rate power. Elizabeth completely checkmated him, and now she seemed to be invincible to all other leaders of Europe. She was now feared by Spain, France, and everyone. The Queen's reputation was golden. Her aura was unmatched. But there were some younger up-and-coming dudes in the political scene who didn't really get along with Elizabeth. Yes, the new generation of politicians and ministers was coming along, and these guys were war-hungry. Not for England's sake. These younger guys wanted to make a name for themselves on the battlefield and earn glory in the eyes of the public. Elizabeth was not on board with starting unnecessary wars, so she cut off funding to any big campaign that wanted to finish off Philip. This man's already depressed and hiding, people. Give him a break, will ya? One of these younger guys who was the face of all this ruckus was Robert Devereux, 2nd Earl of Essex. He buddied up to the Queen pretty quickly. You see, the Queen had a thing for younger guys. Robert admired Elizabeth, but she also scared him, big time. He didn't like the power she possessed over his fate, so he started to test her patience. He kept asking for favors, mostly money, and the Queen would give it to him. Instead of being thankful and loyal, what did this guy do? He said, "Aha! I can manipulate her." That's what he thought, anyway. He started criticizing the Queen boldly in front of other ministers, saying whatever he wanted and throwing a tantrum when him and his friends didn't get the stuff they asked for. Like a man-child. Robert was not really involved in politics, so his only way to glory was to lead an English army to victory. Elizabeth did allow him to lead small expeditions around the continent. Robert was a brave fighter, but he wasn't very good at strategy and planning, so he'd win some and lose some. In 1596, he finally convinced Elizabeth to let him lead a raid on the Spanish coast. His boldness paid off this time, and he emerged victorious. After that win, Robert Essex gained a good amount of fame, and he wanted more. In 1598, a band of Irish rebels under Hugh O'Neill, 2nd Earl of Tyrone, was wreaking havoc in English-controlled territory in Ireland. Aha! Now Robert begged for the chance to lead a force to crush Tyrone. After lots of begging, Queen Elizabeth said, "Yeah, alright. Whatever, nerd." He requested the largest army that England had to offer at the time, and he got it. Robert was ecstatic. He was actually happy this time. He said thank you, and off he went to fight the Irish rebels. This was it, his golden opportunity to rise to the top. But once he got to the battle scene, the problems began to pile up. It was the winter of 1599. The weather was terrible, the terrain was all wet, muddy, and nasty. Moving an entire army forward through this mess would be close to impossible. Meanwhile, the Irish were very sneaky and masters at guerrilla warfare. No, guerrilla warfare does not mean that they bust out the gorilla monkey suits. Guerrilla warfare is when smaller groups of soldiers take on larger groups by relying on hit-and-run tactics and sabotage. Even when the English just sat in their camps, thousands of soldiers would just die from disease. Again, no healthcare. At this point, many soldiers began to desert the battlefield and just run away. All Robert could think of was his reputation. Selfish as always, he convinced himself that the Queen and other ministers were plotting his downfall. Yeah, which mushrooms did you eat on the battlefield? Oh no.
Let's go.
Anyway, he decided to test the Queen again by asking for reinforcements. Sure enough, she sent him reinforcements and told him to finish the job already, find Tyrone and fight him. The pressure on him at this point was too much and he just broke. He started blaming the Queen and the ministers for trying to rush him. He felt utterly humiliated in his position, but he did come up with a plan that would put an end to his misery by the end of the summer. He would secretly negotiate a truce with the Irish, then return to England and march on London with his troops in victory. He would get all the glory and fame he wanted. And he did that. After he marched through England, he randomly showed up one morning in the Queen's bedroom. Very sus behavior. His uniform covered in mud. The Queen said to herself, "What the heck is he doing here? Was he trying to arrest her or launch a coup and betray her?" Oh well, whatever. She played it cool and calmly told him that they'd talk about the Ireland situation later today. This calmness Elizabeth had made him very uncomfortable. It wasn't what he expected, and it felt like she possessed a strange kind of power over him. The tables had been turned, and he agreed to talk later about Ireland. But within hours, the Queen's soldiers grabbed him and put him under house arrest. Bro got grounded. He counted on the Queen to save him. She still likes him, right? Right? He wrote a letter to her apologizing for his selfish actions, but she left him on red. She did not respond. This had never happened before, and it terrified him. Finally, in August of 1600, she freed him. He was grateful, and he was plotting a comeback. He asked Elizabeth for one more favor. He wanted to go back to being in charge of the sale of sweet wines in England. You see, Robert was hopelessly in debt, and this used to be his main source of income, so he wanted it back. The Queen said, nah. Rejected and broke? Ouch, this guy's getting destroyed. Broke and beat up, Robert retired to his house in London and gathered around him all the disgruntled noblemen in England. In one last desperate attempt, he would lead them on a march to the Queen's palace and take over the country. He predicted that thousands of Englishmen who still liked him would rally to his cause. And in early February 1601, he put his plan into action. To his utter misery, the people just stayed in their houses and completely ignored him. His fellow soldiers who saw this were like, I'ma head out now. He was virtually stranded alone and just went back to his house. From trying to take over the country to just going home. He knew that this would be the end for him because that afternoon soldiers came and arrested him. Elizabeth arranged a quick trial. He wasn't even worth much at this point and he was found guilty of treason. This time Elizabeth did not hesitate to sign the death warrant. Robert Devereux had dug his own grave. He figured at least he would die defiant, go to his death a rebel resisting the Queen and denying his guilt. But the night before he was beheaded, the Queen sent her representatives to relay her final words to him, and Robert broke down. All the moments before where he kept humiliating himself and defying the Queen flood into his head. He confessed his crimes and felt the full weight of his betrayal. This is a quote directly from him. I must confess to you that I am the greatest, the vilest, the most unthankful traitor that has ever been in the land. And he said that he deserved to be executed. He asked for his execution to be private so he doesn't stir up any drama in the public. And in his last words, he asked God to preserve the Queen as he quietly went to his death. Congratulations, you have made it to the end of the video. Now there remains one mystery for the scientists to figure out, because this is a hard one. Why haven't you subscribed yet? I mean, hear me out. You're here at the end of the video. You probably, I might just be speculating here, but you probably liked the video just a little bit. So why don't you, help me out and subscribe down below. Videos like this take a lot of effort to make. You need a script writer, an editor/animator, a sound designer. If you noticed, all of those guys are me. I do everything. This video took me 2 months to make, so please, subscribe. Goodbye.